Hello, little sparrows. This is a story about a prince, Prince Cheri. There was once a king who was such an honorable man that his subjects called him the Good King. One day, while he was out hunting, a little rabbit that his dogs were about to kill threw itself into his arms. The king caressed the little creature and said, "As you have put yourself under my protection, nobody shall harm you." And he carried the rabbit to his palace and ordered a pretty little hutch to be made for it. That night, when he was all alone in his room, there appeared a lovely lady. She wore a robe as white as snow and a wreath of white roses on her head. She addressed him thus: "I am the fairy Sanji. I wish to see if you were as good as everybody declares you are. And for this reason, I changed myself into a little rabbit and ran into your arms in distress. For I know that those who have pity for dumb creatures still have more pity for mankind. I have come to thank you for what you did, and I say that I shall always be your friend, and I will grant any request you would now like to make." "Madam," replied the king, "I have only one son whom I love devotedly. His name is Prince Cheri. If you have any goodwill for me, be a friend to my son." "Willingly," responded the fairy. "I will make your son the most handsome prince in the world, or the richest, or the most powerful. Choose what you will like for him." "Well, I desire none of these things," replied the king, "but I shall very much oblige if you will make him the best of all princes. For what good would it do him to be handsome, rich, or even powerful if he were wicked? You know he would be unhappy, for it is only goodness which brings content." "You are right," answered the fairy, "but that I cannot do, for Prince Cheri must himself strive to become good. All that I can, I promise that I will give him good advice and punish him for his faults, if he will not himself correct them." And with this his father had to rest content. Not long afterwards, the good king died, and 2 days later the fairy appeared to Prince Cheri. "I promised your father to be your friend," she told him. "Here is a little gold ring. Take care of it, for it is worth more than diamonds. Every time you are about to do any wrong action, it will prick you. If in spite of the pricks you continue your bad actions, you will lose my friendship, and I shall become your enemy." Saying this, the fairy vanished, leaving the prince very much astonished. For some time, Cheri behaved so well that the ring did not prick him at all. But one day he returned from the chase, having caught nothing. He felt so ill-humored that when his dog Bibi came fawning upon him, he kicked the poor faithful creature from him. At that moment the ring pricked like a pin running into his finger. "What's this?" he exclaimed. "That fairy must be mocking me. Surely I've done no great harm in kicking an animal that has annoyed me. What's the use of being a ruler of a great empire if I am not to treat a dog as I will?" "I am not mocking you," he heard the reply in his thoughts. "You have been bad-tempered, and you have behaved unkindly to a poor animal who did not deserve such treatment. I know that you are higher than a dog, but the advantage of being ruler of a great empire is not in doing all the harm one wishes, but in doing all the good one can." Cheri promised to be better, but he did not keep his word, and so the ring often pricked him, sometimes until his finger bled, and at last, in anger, he threw it away. Now he thought he would be truly happy, and he gave way to any foolish fancies and wrong wishes that came into his head, until he really became very wicked and was disliked by everyone. One day when he was out walking, he saw a girl named Zili, who was so beautiful that he resolved to marry her. But Zili was as good as she was beautiful, and said to him, Sir, I'm only a shepherdess, and I have no fortune, but in spite of that, I could never marry you, for although I should be a queen, you are handsome and rich. Your evil behavior would make me hate you." Upon this, Cheri flew into a passion and ordered his officers to carry Zili to the palace. But she was treated well, for the prince loved her. However, after a while, urged on by his foster brother, a rather bad man who encouraged Cheri in his wickedness, the young man rushed into a rage to the room which Zili was confined, determined that if she still refused to marry him, the very next day she would be sold as a slave. Great was his surprise on entering the apartment to find the captive had disappeared, for he carried the key of the door in his pocket. Amongst those of the royal court was a counselor named Solomon, a man of noble mind who had often dared to tell the prince of his faults. At first he had been thanked for this, but later on Cheri grew angry that anyone should presume to blame him, while all the others at the court were full of flattery and praise. But in his heart of hearts the prince respected this good man, and this wicked flatterers knew full well, and therefore feared lest he should come into the prince's favor. So now they falsely said that it was Solomon who had helped Zili to escape, and beyond himself with fury, Cheri commanded his foster brother to send soldiers to bring Solomon to him, to bring him in chains like an animal. After giving these orders, Cheri retired to his chamber, but scarcely had he entered when the earth trembled. There came a great clap of thunder, and the fairy Sanji appeared before him. "I promised your father," she said in a rather stern voice, "to give you good advice and to punish you if you refuse to follow it. You have despised my counsels, and your crimes have converted you into a monster, the horror of heaven and of earth. Now it is time to fulfill my promise of punishment. I condemn you to take the semblance of beasts you are like in disposition, a lion because of your fury, a wolf on account of your greediness, a serpent for destroying him who has been a second father, a bull by reason of your brutality." Hardly had the fairy pronounced these words when Cheri perceived with horror that his body had been transformed. He had a lion's head, a bull's horns, the feet of a wolf, and the tail of a viper. At the same moment he found himself in a forest, and there, after roaming about miserably for some time, he fell into a deep pit dug by hunters. He was captured and led into the capital of his kingdom. On the way hither, instead of acknowledging that he had brought this evil plight upon himself, he bit at his chains and cursed the fairy. As he was nearing the city, great rejoicings were seen on every side, and the hunters were inquiring for the reason. They were told that Prince Cheri, whose only pleasure it was to torment his people, had been crushed to death in his chamber by a thunderbolt, a just punishment for his offenses. 4 of his companions had tried to partition the kingdom between themselves, but the people would have no such rule, and they had offered the crown to the good and wise Solomon. Cheri panted with rage on hearing this. In the palace square he saw Solomon on a superb throne, and all the people who shouted with joy and wished him a long life to repair the evil brought out from their former sovereign. "I accept the throne," said Solomon, "but it is to preserve for Prince Cheri. A fairy has revealed to me that he is not dead, and possibly will return to you as virtuous as in his earlier years." Alas, Solomon began to cry. His flatterers have ruined him, I know that in his heart he is a good king." These words moved Cheri to sorrow for his crimes, and he felt that he had not been punished as severely as he deserved, and now he resolved in his heart to amend his faults. Therefore he obeyed the man who had charge over him, who constantly cruelly beat him. And one day when this keeper lay asleep, and a tiger who had broken loose was about to devour him, Cheri fought the fierce beast and saved the man's life. Then a voice was heard saying, "A good action shall be rewarded." And to Cheri's joy, he was instantaneously transformed into a pretty little dog, which the keeper carried to the queen. The queen was delighted with him, but for fear that he should grow bigger, she gave him only small pieces of bread to eat, so that poor Cheri nearly died of hunger. One day, he carried this little piece of bread into the garden to eat it there. But wandering with it in his mouth, still further on, he saw a young girl, pale and thin, and almost fainting for want of food. "Oh, I am hungry," thought Cheri, "but if I give my breakfast to this poor thing, perhaps I shall save her life." He placed his bread in the girl's hand, and she ate it hungrily. Just then, he heard loud cries and saw that it was the beautiful Zili struggling to free herself from 4 men who were carrying her into a house nearby. Cheri, longing to help her, followed them barking, and although the men kicked him savagely, he would not leave the place. Presently, from a window was thrown a plate full of tempting-looking food. Cheri was just about to devour it when the girl to whom he had given the bread rushed forward and, throwing her arms around him, cried, "Oh, poor little dog, don't touch that food. Oh, please don't touch it, it's poisoned." Just then a voice was heard saying, "You see that a good action meets with reward." And at the same time, Cheri was changed into a pretty white pigeon. For several days he flew around hoping to catch sight of Zili, and at last, seated by a hermit outside a cave, he found her. Fluttering down, he alighted upon her shoulder. Zili stroked his feathers, and whispering that she now accepted his gift and would love him always. And at that moment, Cheri regained his natural figure, and Fairy Sonji appeared in the place of a hermit in a form she had taken. "Come, my children," she said, "I'm going to transport you to your palace, and that Cheri may receive his crown, for which now he has become quite worthy." And hardly had she ceased speaking when they found themselves in Solomon's presence. The worthy governor was delighted to behold his dear master, and gladly resigned the throne to him. Cheri and Zili reigned long and happily, and we are told that the ring, which the prince now wore again, never once severely pricked him. Until next time, little sparrows, be well.